This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It's me great pleasure to introduce the President of the Singapore University of Social Sciences, Professor Tan Tai Yong. And Professor, you are the second head of the institution because you're a relatively new institution. So could you talk to us about your leadership journey and your journey through scholarship and as a learner?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. So, as you said earlier, I'm the second president of the Singapore University of Social Sciences, which I will now abbreviate as SUSS for ease of conversation. I joined SUSS as president at the start of 2023. So this is my third year as president. Prior to that, I was the president of Yale NUS College, a liberal arts college at the National University of Singapore. And before that, I had held various academic leadership positions as dean, as head of department, dean, vice provost. So I've had several years of administrative experience and academic leadership roles. Now, why did I join SUSS in 2023? To be perfectly honest, this was something I did not plan or nor anticipate. I was completing my 5-year term as president of Yale NUS College in 2022. And as you might know, just before that, National University of Singapore announced that it was not continuing the partnership with Yale. So there were plans to transform the Liberal Arts College into a kind of an honors college situated at NUS. The reasons for these decisions are complex, and I will not go into it. But I had indicated to my board that I was not going to seek a second term. I was kind of getting tired and I wanted to go back to teaching and scholarship. So I was planning to step off in the middle of 2022 at the end of my 5-year term. I was appointed president in 2017, so 2022 complete 5 years. The president of NUS accepted my decision, as did the chair of my board, and I was asked what I intended to do after this, and I had a very simple answer. I said, I'll just take a brief sabbatical and then go back to teaching and being a regular professor, which I've always wanted to do, but for various reasons, I've not been able to function as such. So they said, accepted. And then lo and behold, in a matter of 2 weeks, I had a call from a headhunting company asking me if I would consider this role. I did not give a commitment. I said, look, I'm looking forward to a break. And I'm not sure if I'm the person you should be looking for. And to be perfectly honest, I knew very little about SUSS. But when I got into the conversation with the headhunters, what they told me about the university intrigued me. They said that this is not a typical university, the type of university that I've been very familiar with, but this is a university that seeks to enhance educational opportunities for adult learners, for people who are in the workforce. And I felt that this is something that, it was quite meaningful, given the demographic changes in Singapore, disruptions caused by technology to the workforce, and people having to live and work longer and needing new skills. So I said, this is quite an important institution, but still, I wasn't convinced I was the person for the job. I said, maybe you need someone who has very good industry experience. Be that as it may, I said, if you guys are looking for someone, I'm happy to leave my name on your table, but go and do a search and see what comes up. But then they told me, with a little twinkle in the eye, they said that we've been doing the search for 2 years and we haven't found anybody. And the toss-up, I was told, was whether they wanted someone from industry or an academic. And after an extensive search and consultation, they felt that having an academic in a role was important. So I said, well, then you guys go and discuss. And then I had calls from the university, from the Ministry of Education. We had further chats. And then I was convinced that this was something that I would not mind dedicating the next phase of my career to doing. I went back, I spoke to my family. They were amazed that I was thinking of leaving NUS because I have been a lifer at National University of Singapore. I know 35 years almost, and going on. So they never thought I would leave the university, but I said, well, this is still Singapore. And, it's part of the national university system because SUSS is an autonomous university, a state university. I spoke to my senior colleagues at the National University of Singapore, and they gave me their blessings. They say, this is good for Singapore, and, we should spread our talents. And as things turn up, you might know that all six universities in Singapore, state universities, are led by NUS alums. And these are all my contemporaries, National University of Singapore, Nanyang Technology University, Singapore Management University, etc. So that's how I landed the job at SUSS. My predecessor, Professor Cheong Hee Kiat, I've known for some years, but not very well. Then we had several conversations, and he spoke to me about his plans for the university. You see, he had seen the transition of SUSS from a private university. A bit of history here. SUSS evolved from SIM University, or SIM University for short. SIM was a private institution. It was a private provider of degrees. It did not have the charter to issue degrees, so it went into partnership with Australian, UK universities, University of London, Wollongong, Newcastle, RMIT, and then it issued degrees as a result of that. Then it decided that it wanted a charter, so it got a charter from the government to form the University of SIM, which allowed it to give degrees, but still function as a private institution. The government felt that it was time for a university in Singapore to look after this group of people that SIM University was looking after, that is the working adults, and therefore decided to convert SIM University into SUSS. So that happened in 2014, and SIM University stopped functioning and SUSS came into being. However, there is still a SIM in Singapore, and we are actually sitting in the vicinity because that's where we came out from. But that continues to function as it did before, as a platform offering external degrees issued by universities that they are in partnership with. So I think there are 10 universities: University of London, Wollongong, Newcastle, RMIT, University of Buffalo. So this is how SIM has continued to function. So SIM University closed and was converted to SUSS. So my predecessor oversaw that transition, and he stayed in a role for 16 years because he was the first president of SIM University. He ran it for, I think, a good 8 years, and then saw the transition. And by 2021-22, just after COVID, he decided that he should retire, and that's how I came into being. So I'm the second president, and basically continuing his work, but the work that is envisioned by the Singapore government of creating a university that would support adult education, lifelong learning, continuing education, and also very close to industry because we are known as an applied university. So not a typical R1 university nor a community college, but an applied university that issues degrees that are relevant to workers, and also opens up opportunities for people who are in the workforce to come back to school. So I've gone in a very long-winded way to explain where I am now, but I hope that was useful background information.
And that was very interesting. And in my research, I discovered that you did your PhD at Cambridge.
Right.
And that your discipline is history. So do you think being an historian creates a different way of understanding the role of a university and has shaped your practice as a university leader?
I think it has contributed because, we, as historians, we're trained to think in time, right? Think through time. And basically, having a long-term perspective helps, I guess, in understanding changes. And universities are not static institutions, as you know. As contexts change, as demands change, as the world changes, universities have to adapt. And I always make the point that universities are one of the longest functioning institutions in the world, alongside the church and the military, because they are able to adapt. But they keep to their core functions of education, of research, of knowledge, but they have all evolved. So I think that being able to think in time allows me to have a perspective of how things will evolve, and how things are never seen as a snapshot, but you will have to see institutions as changing entities as we move along. So that was one good, I guess, thing that my historical training, my training as a historian, did for me. The second is my role as an educator, as a teacher. And I didn't realize this until someone told me. Whenever I deal with an issue, I deal with students and deal with faculty, I put on my role as a teacher to explain change rather than to announce change. I say, this is what we're going to do, go and do it. But I always take the effort to explain why we're doing this and why this is necessary and what are the ups and downs of potential change. So I think that that ability, I guess, to function as a teacher, to explain things, has helped me in my role as an administrator. Because people, sometimes you assume that people know why you want to do certain things, but you cannot. I think that sometimes it's not the case. So you always have to put yourself in the role of a teacher to say, this is why we're doing this. And I think that has helped me in my role, both as a historian and as a teacher.
So as a teacher, what are the principles that underline your practice and your thinking that also guide how you engage with complex organizations, both at NUS, but also SUSS?
Yeah. So what I try to do as a teacher, and especially as a historian, whenever I start a class, I tell my students that 3 weeks after you leave my class, or 3 months at the longest after you leave my class, you're going to forget everything I've taught you in terms of content. But that's not important, because you can get those content now in the palm of your hand through a mobile phone. So that's not important. But what I would like to leave you with is how to process the information that you're going to be swamped with. So that's the first thing. So it's always about the training of the mind. I know this sounds very cliched, but it's always about how you should be thinking about issues and about dealing with content. So that's the first thing that I try to get across to my students. So I say, it doesn't matter. History, everybody tells me that they love history, but they just don't like the fact that they have to memorize facts and remember dates. I say, but that's not the point in history. It's to understand causality, it's to understand how things change, what leads to another. And we have a lot of false assumptions about why things are the way they are. So getting a historical perspective is very important. So that's the first thing that I do when I engage my students. And when I talk to faculty and staff and dealing with complex matters, I also don't assume that things are monocausal. In other words, one factor leads to an outcome. And you got to see that, there are many causes and many shades of gray. Not always easy to explain, but this is something that I talk a lot to people. I would say 70% of the time, generally, people get it. 30% will still struggle. And then these are the people you just need to spend more time with. So communication is a very key component of my leadership style. I like to engage people. I don't like to sit in the office the whole day and wait for things to happen. I walk around and talk to people. And I mean, I don't mean this in a kind of a bragging way, but I think people see me as an approachable leader. I like to have coffee with people, sit down and listen to them, because sometimes you pick up things that you don't know, right? Because you can't assume that you know everything. And then in a conversation, you say, that's an interesting perspective that I had not thought about. Or you see the gaps in people's knowledge. Oh, you mean you didn't understand this? But I've said it 3 times already, and it's still not getting through. And you better review your comms plan. So I think that is something that I do a lot of. And for that, I guess you need energy, and as one gets older, this becomes a bit more challenging. But I've always enjoyed that part of my leadership journey, talking to people, opening up my mind, and hopefully convincing them of why things had to be the way they are, and I guess convincing people rather than telling people.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like you to reflect on your own experience as a student, both at NUS as an undergraduate, but then at Cambridge as a postgraduate. Let's start with, what was it like being an international student at Cambridge?
So Cambridge was a lovely experience, I must say. You know, the university, the environment, and just the whole intellectual context. I've always enjoyed. I mean, it was one of the most enjoyable part of my educational journey. Partly because I went with my wife, and so we had, I always say, an extended honeymoon of 4 years, because we just got married and we went. She did her own course, and then and the two of us lived in a married apartment, and so it was a very nice time. But more importantly, I think at Cambridge, it struck me that the intellectual environment was very important. So you would run into people at the cafeterias, the library, and seminars, and people are always buzzing with ideas, and you can talk to them about a whole host of things. It's not about the cost of properties or the cost of a car, but big issues about human existence, the human condition. So I found that very gratifying. You probably familiar with the Commonwealth PhD system, right? So you didn't have to do a lot of coursework. You didn't have to even learn language if you didn't want to. You had a supervisor, and then you develop your research program. You met a supervisor once in a while. He or she tracks your progress, and you function very independently. So that was how I functioned, and I had a support group in informal sense, fellow PhD students working in more or less the same areas. So we spent a lot of time together. But by and large, I was left on my own, and I did a lot of learning by my own, attending seminars, talking to people. And what I liked about Cambridge was that I could take very long walks, because unlike Singapore, it's not hot and humid. There were very cold months in the winter, but the spring, the summer, the fall, or autumn were periods where the weather was nice and sometimes cold. You just had to be appropriately dressed, but I could walk for 2 hours and not feel fatigued. And the walking also allows me to clear my mind, think about issues. And I think that helped a lot. In Cambridge, we cycled a lot, we walked a lot. So basically that allowed me to think a lot of things. It's a luxury that I cannot have in Singapore. Maybe I could have it in Sydney, but in Singapore, it's just too hot to walk, and it's a city. So and people are always rushing around. So I think that ability to think about issues was one of the most precious aspect of my graduate studies at Cambridge. Now, I spent a year out of Cambridge doing research in India, because that was my dissertation. So I went to India, Pakistan. Again, it was very fascinating research, learn a new society, integrated, and nothing like the experience, I guess, of living in the society that you are studying. You as an anthropology would understand that. So that was my graduate studies. Pretty much independent learning. Made a lot of good friends studying the same area. So this was the intellectual network, as it were. I mean, we're still in touch. Many of my contemporaries are now senior professors here and there, and the network has been quite precious. And then I guess engaging with the dissertation on a 24/7 kind of thing, which in a way it's a kind of a funny existence, right? You live and breathe and eat your dissertation. But Cambridge offered a nice sort of milieu in which one could learn other things. So that was Cambridge, and 4 years it was nice, and just happy that I managed to write a good dissertation and met many good people there.
Now, I'd like you to go back even further. As an historian, you'll do that quite easily, to your own undergraduate experience at NUS. And
Yeah.
what was it like being a local student at NUS and a student doing social sciences, history in particular?
So I studied at NUS as an undergraduate from, let me think now, 1982 to 86. So I did it was a 3+1 system. So you did 3 years as a bachelor, and then the fourth year was the honors. In the Australian system, I think is quite similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember going in. My father had hopes that I would do law or something like that. And I said, no, actually, I want to do history. So I enrolled in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. And then he said, okay, if you're going there, why don't you do economics? Because then you'll be able to get a job after that. And then I fell in love with history and political science. I did 1 week of economics courses and said, oh, it's too tough for me because too mathematical. And I didn't enjoy it at all. So I went into, I majored in political science and history, fell in love with the subjects. My father was a bit disappointed. He said, you're going to be jobless at the end of it all. I said, oh, let's wait and see. At that time, NUS was, I think, the only state university in Singapore. It was the only state university in Singapore. They had made some changes. Oh, they had closed Nanyang University, which was a Chinese university, and merged it with Singapore University to form National University of Singapore. So there was only one University of Singapore. But it was also a very functional university. What do I mean? At that time, the government's, Singapore government's priority was to ensure that there was enough trained manpower to service different sectors of the economy: medicine, law, administration, the economy, etc. So because it was a state university, the planning was done very carefully. So the intake for each faculty was based on projected needs of the country. So at that time, you're familiar with the term cohort participation rate, right? The number of people from the birth cohort that goes into university, probably less than 10%. So it was quite exclusive. But they were selected very carefully, and then because this was part of overall manpower, national manpower planning. So I went into the arts and social sciences, and I guess they expected us in this faculty to eventually end up being a teacher, an administrator, maybe a curator, or someone in the art, dealing with the arts sector. We were left again, there was no such thing as a student life. It was very functional. You went in, you studied. And when I went in, it was year-long courses. So you did 2 major and 1 minor. And each major, you studied over a whole year, and then you got a grade for the particular course. So it was a deep dive kind of thing, like the Cambridge tripod system. There was no interdisciplinary learning. If you were in arts and social sciences and history major, you did history. So I did history and political science. So that was all. And then after that, the university, I wasn't a hostelite, so I did not stay in campus because my parents could afford it. So I was a commuter student, in and out. Took a bus in, studied, took a bus back. Whatever student life, social life we had was self-made. In other words, we form our own groups, we form our own cliques, played football together, went partying together. There was not much of an organized kind of student life where there was no exchange at that time. You want to travel, you travel on your own. So and then there were very few instances of internships as well. So the training was very much cloistered within the university. Of course, some of my friends took their own initiatives, but it was not even considered a good thing because you could delay your graduation. So that was undergraduate. I would say that I educated myself. I mean, I was educated in history and fell in love with history, did a lot of very interesting subjects. So my professional interest in the history of India actually stemmed from my undergraduate days, where I took courses in the subject. But beyond that, I would say that it was not especially memorable, my undergraduate days, because the university was very functional. The joke was that it was almost like a factory, churning out graduates to fulfill different parts of the industry. So the development of the student in a holistic manner was not something that was important to the university at the time. You paid your fees, you studied, don't fail. If you fail, you retook the exam again, and then you try to graduate in 4 years or maximum another 2 semesters. That was the way the undergraduate education of that time in Singapore functioned. So I would say between Cambridge and NUS at the time, I mean, Cambridge was a far superior experience for me, but partly because I was older, I was doing something I really wanted, and just the whole environment of Cambridge was much more enjoyable.
So you spent 4 years as Vice Provost Student Life.
Yeah.
So you were responsible for student life. So tell me about, if I walked around your university, I know NUS, but I don't know your university. So if I walked around your university, what would I see? And what would I observe students, or do they come in and come out, or, is there a student life there?
Okay, so let me just take 2 steps back. I joined NUS as a then a lecturer. Of course, we then converted to the American system of assistant professor later on as a lecturer. After I came back from Cambridge, this was in the early 1990s. NUS then was starting to change because by that time you had a second university, Nanyang Technology University, NTU, and my memory serves me correct, and SMU was starting to emerge. So there were lots more opportunities. The government had then realized that you needed to create. So from a cohort participation rate of 10%, they are trying to increase it to 20%. So you needed to create more spaces. So and then they wanted to transform NUS from merely a graduate producing machine to providing better training for graduates of the future. What was the future? Everybody was guessing. It's going to be transformations, changes, global uncertainties. So you needed to give a different kind of training. So one of the things that happened soon after I came back in the early 90s was this conversion of the system from the year-long courses which I spoke about to the modular system, which meant that you learn in semesters rather than in a year. You took courses which are modular, which you can mix and match. The idea was to create more interdisciplinary possibilities. So you don't have to be locked into 2 majors, but you could take a major or 2 majors, but you have spaces in your curriculum to explore other subjects. And also your learning moves faster, semestral versus the year. So that those things were happening. And then they brought in a new president at the time, I think towards the end of the 1990s, to transform NUS from a British university model to an American model. So this guy came in and he changed a whole host of things, from the curriculum to promotion and tenure to broad-based learning. But one of the things that he was very enamored of the American system, which he felt far superior to Singapore, was the alumni engagement system. Because American universities succeeded, he says, on the strength of alumni engagement, contributions, money, and everything else. So you need to engage alum. But if you just heard what I said earlier about my experience as an undergraduate, I had really no attachment to the university. I was in and out, you see. So basically, to create alumni engagement or alumni loyalty, you had to start in year 1 of their university experience. They must feel that experience meant something. So this president started to change things and basically said that we must make student life something memorable for our students and meaningful. It cannot be commuter students coming in and out and then leave them alone. So things started to happen. And then when I was dean of the faculty, I remember I had to engage alumni, I had to change the way we organize our student curriculum. We had clubs and all this, but get the students more involved with university life. So when I finished my term as dean, I was asked by the president, the provost, to join his team to develop student life. At that time, I was the first vice provost of student life. They created that position for me. In fact, I still remember the title that they gave me was Vice Provost of Student Affairs. Now, we already had an Office of Student Affairs, and I said, no, I didn't want to go in and do regulation things. I wanted to develop student life. So I requested a change. So they changed the thing to Vice Provost of Student Life. Now, as things turn out, there was a piece of land that was opening up alongside NUS. Now, you might have walked through it. It's called University Town. It used to be a golf course. So when that opportunity opened up, I said, as a historian, I said, you have to now see possibilities of opening up space, placemaking, to enable student life. So because of the opportunity of a greenfield kind of a project, we were able to design a campus that would feel different. You have walked through NUS before. There was the old part of NUS, which is just a series of buildings. Now you go to University Town, you have a totally different feel, and I wanted that. So we wanted to create residential colleges so that living, learning becomes a reality. And residential colleges created communities. People belong. I mean, university is too large, right? But if you are part of a college or a faculty or a school or a club, that's how you make the attachments. So I was put in charge of that project, and I worked on it for about 5 years. So we built University Town, and it was a kind of a community space that we wanted to create, where people can move, students can move seamlessly from residential learning to social life, to games, to sports. So the design was actually planned for that kind of purpose. So if you walk through U Town, you'll feel a totally different vibe, because you see students sitting, NUS for the longest time did not have a gathering space, just a series of buildings. University Town, we had a town green. And maybe that was the Cambridge experience in me, right? I said you needed a space where people can sit on the grass and stare at the sky and think. And so we created a town green. Of course, Singapore climate, not always possible, but in the morning and evening. And that place has always been very popular. So people played frisbee, we held concerts on it, we had picnics on it. And just at the edge of University Town, there is a Starbucks, which means that you can just stroll in, get a cup of coffee. So those kinds of design was very deliberate. And we wanted to create a certain kind of student life to generate a certain loyalty, a certain attachment to the university. Then you can have committed alumni. So that was all part of the plan. So that was how I got involved in this. And then, of course, other parts of the university started changing. Student exchange, international exposure, experiential learning, internships, clubs. So there was a student life being built after that. But this only happened in the last 15 years, 15, 20 years. So things started to change only at the end of the 1990s. And it took a while. But I always say that we had this lost generation of alumni, the people who graduated from the 70s to the 90s, because there are no attachments to the university. I was one of them. But hopefully we'll see more positive results 10 years down the road.
Over the last 2 years, there have been major innovations, changes around how students learn, how students are taught, how programs are delivered. And COVID in particular was really one of those moments of dramatic change. But in the last 2 years, we've had ChatGPT. And as an historian, that would be a very interesting intervention and perhaps a dilemma in terms of how you think about delivery, pedagogy, and content. So what do you think the future of university student experience will look like over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think the advent of technology, AI, is going to be a game changer in many ways. So in universities, we're now grappling with the fact, do you allow the use of ChatGPT? You cannot ban it. It's just not possible. Then how do you then review your curriculum, the ways you teach, to ensure that AI is a good servant, but it cannot take over learning. I mean, I use Copilot in my day-to-day work, just helping me frame simple emails and all this, and also organize my data. All these are very helpful. It allows me to save time. but it cannot replace my thought process, seeing things, what I want to tell people, how I want to craft a message. So I think this is how we try to engage our students. The thing that worries me is that with the kind of power, students don't feel the need to read anymore, because you can generate a lot of a very reasoned argument by just going to ChatGPT, say, summarize the 10 books and come up with a summary of what the 10 books say. But I've always lamented that the value of reading a book is you see how an argument is formed over 100 pages. And then you see the yes and the left turns and the right turns and the no's and all this. Then you come to a conclusion. But when you just summarize everything, then you don't know how you miss the journey, you came to the conclusion only. So this is what worries me. So in terms of teaching, we have to find ways in which we can then get the students to explain to us how they came to that conclusion. Whether you use ChatGPT or whether you read 5 books or whatever it is, I want to know your thought process. I think that's important. So I think in terms of the teaching, in terms of the curriculum, that's what we are all trying to get at. So on the one hand, yes, by all means, use the technology to make life easier for you. But that technology cannot replace your ability to think and understand issues. And also, I find that while we did it in COVID to some extent, I didn't like it at all. You know, Zoom meetings and teaching. It's just I found it very unsatisfactory when I don't see somebody and I cannot read body language, facial expressions, and just everybody is on a screen. Some even turn off their videos. So I don't know what's getting across. But COVID, no choice, we had to do this. But now I insist that students, if I were to be in a class, the students show themselves, unless you have very good reasons. So we try to say technology can be an enabler of sorts, but it cannot replace the classroom. So we're trying to develop the right language for them, for my colleagues. Is it kind of a hybrid system, or a technology-enabled system, or what do you call it? Because we want to get that message right, to see that we are not using technology to replace our teaching. Because it's a slippery slope, right? Because students will next come to me and say, well, you know, I especially our students who are working, say, I just cannot come to class. Why don't I just go through 4 years looking at you in the screen, and then I can download everything and then graduate? Say, what sort of university experience is this? So I think that's going to be the challenge. We haven't found the sweet spot, but I think we're all grappling with this. And on the one hand, I can get my colleagues to develop very good learning aids for our students through AI. But I don't want my teachers to just surrender to AI and say, okay, now everything is downloadable. You consult me only when you need to know. I think classes still need to be conducted. So that balance is always kind of a struggle at this point in time.
So what I'm hearing you saying is, in fact, it's more about learning than teaching.
Yeah.
And so if we want students to be able to learn, we need to give them the skills to be able to synthesize, analyze, reflect, and the like.
Yeah.
And we do that a lot in social sciences.
Indeed. And you know, the other thing about the social sciences is that, you know, I grew up and spent the better part of my career at National University of Singapore, which is, you know, internationally renowned as one of the top universities. But its strengths lie in the STEM subjects, you see, technology, engineering, medicine. And I've always made the point, maybe I was a lone voice because, you know, the leadership at that time were mainly scientists and engineers, is that, you know, in this day and age, you have to incorporate the social sciences into technology to understand how things work. I mean, climate change, everybody talks about the sciences, understand, but it's human behavior that's at the end of the core of it, right? And if you don't understand that, the same for AI now, you know, if people know how to use the technology, but without the ethics, without understanding its impact on society, then, you know, it can run rogue very quickly. So these are issues. So we try to articulate this as much as we can in an R1 university. I think people hear us but you need people to be able to come together, to work together as teams to see how we can bring this together. At SUSS, what's happening is that because the university focuses, so I have to explain that when we talk about the social sciences, it's not just the disciplines of the social sciences, it's actually society. So the things that we do as an applied university must be of use to society. So I don't want to teach you the sociology of aging. I want to get you to understand how to apply that knowledge to deal with the challenges of aging in Singapore. So that's a difference, you see, and it's not just an esoteric kind of experience where you study the sociology and the theory and happy with it, but we want to see how to apply this knowledge. So adult learning is actually one of the things that I'm trying to do more of. We talk of it as a necessity. It's happening. We all have to learn as we grow older. But what's the science of adult learning? How do old people learn? You know the term andragogy, right? And now I'm learning there's a new term called geragogy or geragogy. How old people learn and what support do they need and that sort of thing. So these are things that I think we can do a lot more of so that we can actually contribute to that phase in our evolution where these things are so important now, rather than studied as a theory. So I think these are, and that's one of the reasons why I was attracted to this university, because I think these are very interesting things that we can do a lot more, and it's going to be so meaningful if we get it right.
I've got two more questions, and then the last question is actually a bit of a cheeky question. So let me ask you the two. So what advice would you give to your younger self?
So advice I'll give to my youngster. You know, I've always, you know, when I ran so this is a tricky answer. When I ran the Faculty of Art and Social Sciences, I had departments under me from economics and psychology on the one hand to ethnic studies program like Malay studies and Chinese studies. And because I was the dean, I saw demand and supply and salary ranges, and then I always told myself, maybe I should not have been an historian. I should have been an economist or a finance business person, because my salary would have been high. But I jest. What would I have told myself? Maybe I would have said, learn more economics, not because of the salary, but understanding human behavior, because humans are economic beings in the end. You know, and also understanding world affairs through economics. I wish I'd not given up economics totally and focused on history and political science, but done some economics. That's number one. Number two, maybe to also be less fearful, as I was at the time and I still am, of technology. You know, where we could try not to do it, because I can't understand, you know, how to write algorithms, how to write programs. But maybe when your mind is younger, more nimble, I should have dived into it a little bit more, understand how the computer worked, be able to take apart a computer and put it back together. Those kinds of things, I wish I'd done more of it when I was younger. So
you mentioned that you talk to students, you walk around campus, and as Vice Provost of Student Life, you would have had a lot to do with students. You would have been to many graduations over the period of your career.
Indeed.
What advice do you give to students now?
So the advice I'll give to students, you know, I used to tell students, that they now all have much longer working lives than my parents had. My father retired at the age of 55, and then he lived to 85. So he had 30 years post-retirement life. I'm coming to 65. My tenure at the university at NUS before I left was up to 65, which means that by next year, I technically would retire. But I mean, hopefully, you know, only God knows. If I could live for another 20 years, I could do a lot more things in that time. So my advice to students is that you're going to live longer and you're going to work longer. So you got to plan for that. So don't rush in thinking after graduation that you have to find that perfect job and then staying in a job for 30 years. It ain't going to happen. Unlike my time, there are many of my friends who are lifers, but it's not going to happen anymore. I see it in my own children. My daughter graduated 5 years ago, already in her third job. So these things will change. So first of all, have that perspective. In other words, don't think that one job is going to last your life. Two, you must be open to relearning. In other words, the knowledge that you have or the qualifications that you have at the age of 22 with your first degree will become obsolete in no time. I mean, in fact, studies have shown, right, World Economic Forum, that skills obsolescence, half-life is now 2.5 years, which means that in 2.5 years, what you know or the skills that you have for your job is only half valid. Now, if that's going to happen, then you better be prepared to keep learning, which means that you have to keep coming back to school. So don't think that your first degree is the end all and then your master's is the kind of nice to have dessert, you know, because everybody has a master's. But you got to seriously think of a second degree, even a third degree, or at least learn to go along. So when you ask what advice I'll give to my younger self, if I were 10 years younger, I would have taken up courses on computing, perhaps, you know, some basic algorithms so that I understand how these things work, you see. And that's what I need to tell my young people. And third, to really keep an open mind, because the world changes so quickly and there isn't perfection. So don't think that once I find a good job that pays well, I have a wonderful boss, my life is complete. You know, it just doesn't come together like that. So be prepared to open and say how to reinvent yourself and take chances if you have to. So the trouble with the students I deal with, the degree is the crowning moment, you see, the first degree. And they think that once I've reached that, I've arrived. And I said, no, you just put a little foot in a door that's just slightly open. It's still not fully open for you. So that's the advice I'll give to my students.
So my cheeky question is, what are you reading now?
Actually, I've been reading, okay, I'll tell you what I'm reading now. I'm thinking, and I still harbor the hope. So going back again, before I took on this job, as I stepped off Yale and US, I thought that I would have a time to write my next book. And I had organized I've moved into Singapore history, so to speak, beyond Indian history. So I was thinking of writing a book on the first 10 years of Singapore's independence. And this has something to do with what we've been talking about. Because in 1965, Singapore became a nation state. And basically, unexpected, it was told to leave Malaysia. So the history was that it was planning to be part of the Malaysian Federation. It didn't work, it went out. So Singapore became a nation state in an unexpected way. And then it had to function as a small state, no hinterland, small little global city. And then it had to make it work. And if you look back in history, you know, Singaporeans can pat themselves on the back and say, hey, we made it. But the first 10 years was a time of great uncertainty, and nobody knew if Singapore would survive, not even Lee Kuan Yew, founding prime minister. So I wanted to write a book to capture the anxieties, the uncertainties of that period. So I started reading and all, and then this job came along, so I had to put everything aside. But I still have, you can't see it on your Zoom, but on my right-hand side, there's a pile of readings on the first 10 years of Singapore's history. So I've been going back to Lee Kuan Yew's memoirs. I've been reading recently published memoirs of the founding leaders. I've been reading, in fact, last week I moderated a talk by the Minister of Education, because this is the 60th anniversary of Singapore. He gave a talk on the history of education in Singapore, education system. So I was reading up to prep myself for the talk. So those are my reading staple at this point in time, mainly to do with Singapore history, the various aspects, economy, education, defense, housing. So these are things that I'm reading now. Not one book, but a series of things as I had to write various opening lines or speeches. So it's back and forth. But the main theme is on Singapore's history from 1965 to 1975.
I have enjoyed our conversation enormously. I've learned a lot about Singapore. And even though I've probably been there about 20 times, you've given me new insights into it as well. Thank you for your time today. And I think your university is different. And that applied nature just is so appropriate to carry Singapore into its next 60 years. And I wish you well in your leadership, and I wish your institution well, and I hope that it continues to thrive. So hopefully sometime we may cross each other's paths.
Indeed. Thank you very much for your time and for your questions. And it does get me to think about things a lot more. And I really hope to be able to see you in Singapore and host you at my university and maybe introduce you to some of my colleagues. Thank you very much for your time.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.